The sun hung heavy and merciless over the dry plains, making the air shimmer like a mirage. Dust clung to every surface, the earth cracked and thirsty. Not far from a small, worn-out homestead sat a man slumped in the dirt, his clothes torn, his sides slick with blood. He was a rancher by the look of his weathered face and dirt-stained boots, but now he was barely clinging to consciousness. Each breath was labored, his lips cracked, and his voice too faint to carry far. The homestead itself was modest little more than a house with a lopsided porch, a creaky barn, and a withering vegetable patch. Inside, a woman named Martha, though everyone just called her Mama, was hauling a bucket of water from the well. She was slender but strong, her hands calloused from years of labor, her face hardened by a life that had given her little kindness. Yet beneath that exterior was a heart that still ached for the suffering of others, a heart her husband had tried to beat out of her many times as she crossed the yard. Something caught her eye at the edge of the horizon, a shape, slumped and still. Her first thought was an animal. But when she squinted against the harsh light, she realized it was a man struggling to lift his head. Instinctively, she set the water down and ran to him, her skirts gathering dust. She knelt by his side, her shadow shielding his face from the sun. His eyes, a piercing pale blue, fluttered open just enough to meet hers. "Water," he rasped out without hesitation. Mama brought the bucket to his lips, helping him sip just enough to wet his throat. She looked over his body, seeing the blood, the torn shirt, the bruises. Someone had done this to him, someone with cruelty in their bones, but kindness was dangerous on her land. She glanced back toward the house, where inside, her husband Clyde napped in his chair, likely with a bottle still in his grip. Clyde was a violent, paranoid man, always convinced that every stranger was a threat, a thief, or worse. He ruled the homestead with fists and fear, especially when drink was in him, which was often. Still, Mama couldn't leave the man to die. She tried to help him sit, but he winced in agony, clutching his side. She whispered, "I'm gonna help. But you gotta stay quiet. My husband finds you here. He'll kill you sure as daylight." She managed to drag him to a shaded spot beside the barn where the air was cooler. She fetched a torn rag, dipped it in water, and cleaned his wound as best she could. The man barely stirred, but his breathing eased slightly. Unbeknownst to Mama, a pair of wide, watchful eyes peered through the cracks of the barn. It was her daughter, Etta, no more than 10 years old, clutching her younger brother to her chest. Etta had seen plenty of her father's temper to know what this meant. Mama helping a stranger was a death sentence in Clyde's mind. Etta's small body trembled, wanting to scream for Mama to stop, to run, to hide, but she stayed frozen. Her heart pounding. Mama whispered softly to the stranger, "I'll get you more water, and I'll try to dress the wound, but you gotta stay still." She didn't ask him who he was, where he came from, or why he was shot. None of that mattered, not yet. What mattered was that he was breathing, and that meant he deserved a chance. But already, the air in the house stirred, the familiar creak of Clyde's chair, the heavy thud of boots hitting the wooden floor. Mama's time was running out, and the shadow of danger was already stretching across the yard. Mama's compassion had just bought her a death sentence. She just didn't know it yet. Clyde's heavy footsteps thudded across the porch, slow but angry. Inside the house, his nap had ended early, the quiet outside unsettling him. He was the kind of man who distrusted silence. It made him feel like people were up to things they shouldn't be. With the bottle still gripped in one hand, he squinted through the bright afternoon sun. That's when he spotted her Mama kneeling by the barn, bent over something. Or someone. His heart sank into rage before his mind could catch up. Staggering forward, Clyde yelled, "What the hell are you doing?" Mama froze, her hand still on the wounded man's chest. She looked up to see Clyde barreling toward her, his face already twisted with suspicion and fury. She stood abruptly, trying to block the stranger with her body. "It's just a man, Clyde. He's hurt bad, left to die." "I couldn't just—" "You couldn't just what?" Clyde barked, his eyes wild. "You couldn't just mind your damn business, that's—" "What?" He shoved her aside roughly, her frail body hitting the barn wall with a thud. He stepped over her and grabbed the wounded rancher by the collar, dragging him through the dirt as the man groaned weakly. "Who sent you?" Clyde spat, shaking the man like a ragdoll. "You think you can just trespass, steal from me maybe?" "Worse." The rancher didn't answer. He was barely conscious, his head lolling to one side. Mama stumbled to her feet, blood trickling from her lip where she'd bitten down in the fall. She cried out, "Clyde, stop. He's got nothing." He was dying out there. Clyde spun on her, eyes narrowed. "You protecting him?" His voice was low now, dangerous. "You bringing strange men onto my land? This how you pay me back for putting a roof over your head?" Etta watched from inside the barn, hands shaking as she tried to muffle her brother's whimpering. She could see the storm building in her father's body. She'd seen it before. But this time was worse. This time, his pride had been wounded. And that made him deadly. "I did what any decent person would," Mama said, breathless but steady. "You'd leave a man to die? Is that who you are?" Clyde sneered. "I'm a man who keeps what's his, and that includes his wife." "His?" Gaze darkened as he stepped toward her. "You made your choice, woman. You picked him." Mama didn't flinch. She stood straight, defiant even as her body ached. "I picked decency." That was the final straw. Clyde's face twisted in something between rage and betrayal. Without another word, he grabbed her by the hair, dragging her toward the edge of the homestead where a dry, shallow ditch lay. The same ditch he always threatened to throw people in if they crossed him. Etta followed silently, hiding behind the tall weeds, her heart pounding in her chest. Mama fought him, clawing and kicking, but Clyde was stronger. He shoved her into the ditch, grabbed the shovel that stood nearby, and started throwing dirt over her body. "You want to pick him over me?" "Fine," Clyde snarled, his breath heavy with liquor. "You can rot with the rest of the filth." Each shovelful of dirt hit Mama's body, heavy and cold. She screamed, coughed, pleaded, but Clyde kept going like a man possessed. Etta's tears ran freely now, but she was frozen, watching her father bury her mama alive. She wanted to run to her, to help, but what could a 10-year-old do against a man like Clyde? The last thing Etta saw before the dirt covered her mama's face was her mother's eyes still open, still fighting, still alive. And in that moment, Ada promised herself one thing: Mama would not die easy. The final shovel of dirt landed with a soft thud, muffling everything beneath. Clyde stood over the crude grave, breathing hard, sweat mixing with the dust caked on his neck. The sun, once harsh and punishing, had begun to lower in the sky, casting long, cruel shadows across the land. To Clyde, the job was done. His message had been sent: betray him, and you die. He spat on the dirt mound and staggered back to the house, not even looking at the wounded rancher still barely alive by the barn. But deep beneath that dirt, Mama wasn't dead. Not yet. At first, the weight of the soil crushed against her chest, stealing her breath. Panic clawed up her throat as she tried to scream, but the earth swallowed every sound. Her limbs were weak, her lungs screaming, but something in her, something primal, refused to give in. She thought of her children. Etta's wide, terrified eyes flashed through her mind. She thought of her baby boy, too small to fend for himself. That thought lit a fire in her gut. With a desperate surge of will, Mama managed to shift her hand. The dirt was heavy, but not packed tight. She pushed, an inch at a time, her nails tearing, her muscles burning. Every movement sent waves of pain through her body, but she kept going, inch by inch. Her face, pressed deep in the soil, strained. For even the smallest gasp of air dot above ground, the sky shifted from fiery orange to dusky purple. A soft breeze picked up, rustling the grass, carrying the smell of dirt and sweat and death. Etta remained hidden nearby, paralyzed with fear. She wanted to believe her mama was still alive, but how could anyone survive being buried alive? Then she saw it. A small patch of dirt trembled and cracked. Etta's eyes widened. She wanted to shout, but her voice was caught in her throat. She watched as, slowly, a single hand punched through the earth, fingers clawing at the open air. More dirt shifted as Mama's arm followed, and then her face, smeared with mud, her mouth gasping desperately. Mama coughed violently, spitting dirt from her mouth, tears streaming as her body shook from exhaustion and terror. But she was alive. Somehow, she was alive. She collapsed back on the dirt, her body half out of the grave, just breathing, just existing. The sky above was a blur of stars beginning to twinkle, but Mama's mind was already focused. She couldn't stay there. Clyde would check. He'd kill her for real this time. With everything she had left, she dragged herself out of the pit, crawling on her belly through the grass toward the barn. Every inch was agony, but the thought of her children, of Etta watching, of her baby. Boy still defenseless inside the house kept her moving. At the barn, Etta emerged from hiding, silently weeping with relief. She helped pull Mama inside, where the shadows could hide them. In the barn's far corner was a hollow beneath the floorboards, an old storage space barely big enough to fit a person. It was where Etta often hid when her father's rage was too much to bear. Together they slipped Mama into that space. She lay there, her breath shallow, body trembling, but her eyes sharp with a single truth. She was not done yet. Etta brought her water in an old tin cup, wiping her Mama's face gently. "I thought you were gone," the girl whispered, tears still spilling. Mama, her voice raw and faint, whispered back, "Not yet, baby. Not yet." Out by the barn wall, the wounded rancher still lay barely breathing. But now in the dark of the barn, two battered souls, Mama and the stranger, were both alive. And Clyde didn't know it yet, but his nightmare was only just beginning. Barn became a place of shadows, dust, and quiet breathing. Beneath its wooden floorboards, hidden in a cramped, dirt-walled space barely big enough for a grown woman to stretch, Mama lay wrapped in old sacks and straw. Her body ached from every angle, ribs bruised, skin torn, muscles weak, but her mind burned clear. She was alive, and that meant she still had a fight left in her. Etta was her lifeline. Every night, when Clyde snored drunk and deep in the house, Etta would creep to the barn, bringing water in an old metal cup and stale bread she'd hidden in her apron. She also brought scraps of cloth, dipping them in water to cool Mama's fevered skin and clean the crusted blood from her scalp. "Mama, why did he why did he do that?" Etta asked one night, her voice small, fragile. Mama stared up at the wooden slats above her, her voice raw and low. "Because he's afraid of anything he can't own or control. He thinks kindness makes us weak, but he's wrong." Etta sat with her for as long as she dared each night, listening to her mother's breathing and the lessons she whispered about courage, about decency, and about surviving even when the world wants you dead. Above them, the wounded rancher ridge, as Mama had learned, remained half-conscious near the barn wall. Etta tended to him too, dabbing his wound with water-soaked cloth, whispering that help was near, even though she wasn't sure what help could be. Ridge's eyes fluttered open more often now, though his voice was weak and raspy. One night, as Etta crouched near Ridge, he grasped her wrist weakly. "Your ma. She's the strongest woman I've seen," he muttered. "Don't let her die down here." "Not like this." Etta nodded, her little face set with a determination far beyond her years. She knew they had to be careful. Clyde was growing restless. He'd started pacing the house and the yard, muttering about rats stealing food and ghosts in the barn. His drunken mind couldn't make sense of it, but suspicion was growing in his gut. He'd begun checking the barn more often, kicking at the floorboards, sniffing the air like a wolf on a trail. Etta knew it was only a matter of time before he found a hiding spot. That one evening, before sunset, Mama whispered to Etta, "Baby, if anything happens, you take your brother and run. Don't look back." "No," Etta whispered fiercely. "I ain't leaving you." Mama smiled weakly, proud. Even in her pain, "You're my girl." It was Ridge, groaning from his corner, who caught their attention. His voice was clearer now, his eyes sharper despite the pain. "I can help you," he said, forcing himself to sit upright. "But I need time and a gun." Mama's brow furrowed. "There's a rifle. Clyde keeps it behind the door." "But—" "Etta can't—" "I can," Etta interrupted, her small hand balling into a fist. "Teach me." So, over the next nights, Ridge, still weak but driven, taught Etta how to hold the rifle, how to aim, how to steady her breath. Mama watched, torn between pride and dread. Her little girl, forced to learn the tools of violence to survive a father who should have protected them. But there was no other choice now. Meanwhile, Clyde grew more dangerous with every passing day. He'd stopped drinking just enough to think clearer, to feel the weight of something wrong on his land. He started watching Etta more closely, asking sharp questions about the missing food, the noises in the barn. She lied as best as she could, but she could feel his suspicion hardening into certainty. One afternoon, as the wind howled low across the plains, Clyde stood by the barn door, staring hard at the floorboards. He kicked the dirt, listening for hollow sounds. Mama, beneath those boards, held her breath. She knew he was getting too close. Under the barn's dusty floorboards, a fragile alliance of survival had formed. Mama, still battered and thin, listened carefully as Ridge coached Etta on how to use the rifle. Ridge's voice was quiet but firm, his breath still shallow from his healing wound. He taught Etta how to steady her arms, how to line her sight along the barrel, and most importantly, when to shoot. "You don't fire just to scare," Ridge whispered. "You fire to end it, quick and sure." Mama winced hearing that, her heart aching that her 10-year-old had to bear such a burden. But deep down, she knew there was no other way. Clyde wouldn't stop until he'd hunted them all down. She'd seen that glint in his eyes before, the one that said mercy was a weakness, and he had none to give. At night, Mama gathered her strength bit by bit. She forced herself to sit up longer, to breathe deeper, to swallow what little food Etta could sneak her. Ridge, too, grew stronger by the day. The gash in his side still bled sometimes, but his mind was sharp, and his body no longer felt like it was on the edge of death. "We need a plan," Ridge whispered one evening. "Clyde won't just leave us be. He's suspicious. He feels US under his skin like a splinter. We need to strike first." Mama shook her head weakly. "I want to, God knows I do. But I can't leave my boy. He's still in that house. We'll get him," Ridge promised. "We wait for the right night, a dark one. Etta knows the land. She can lead us through the back trails." Etta listened quietly, her mind absorbing every detail. She'd never fired a gun before, never even thought of pointing one at her father, but now? Now she saw him for what he truly was, not a protector, not a father, but a monster in human skin. Meanwhile, Clyde's suspicions thickened like smoke. He began checking the barn each morning, poking his boot at the floorboards, tilting his head as if he could hear voices in the walls. He stopped drinking, at least not enough to dull his senses, and started carrying his pistol at all times, even to the outhouse. "Something's out there," Clyde muttered one night, pacing the porch. Rats. Ghosts. Or worse. His mind was twisted by paranoia. He'd seen the food disappearing, the footprints too small to be his own. The land was speaking to him, whispering that someone was hiding right under his nose. He began setting traps around the barn, rusted bear traps, hidden beneath leaves and loose hay. Etta barely avoided them on her nightly runs, once nearly losing her foot. She came back breathless, dirt-smeared, but defiant. "He's on to us," she whispered to Mama and Ridge. "We gotta hurry." The pressure built like a storm cloud. Ridge insisted Etta keep practicing with the rifle. Every night, by the barn's rear where Clyde couldn't see, she practiced loading, aiming, and even dry firing. Her small hands shook, but her eyes were steady. Mama watched her daughter in the moonlight, her heart torn in two. She was proud, but she also hated that this was the life her child had to live, learning to kill her own father to survive. One night, while Etta was practicing, Ridge turned to Mama and said quietly, "If we don't move soon, he's gonna find us. We strike before the week's out." Mama nodded, her jaw clenched. "Then let's finish it." But that same night, Clyde stepped into the barn just before dawn, a lantern in one hand, pistol in the other. His eyes scanned the room with a predator's glare. He was listening, sniffing, sensing, and when he kicked a particular floorboard, the hollow echo it made brought a grin to his face. "Thought I smelled a corpse," he muttered. "Let's see who's down there." The time for hiding had just run out. Clyde stood in the barn, lantern swinging, pistol cocked, eyes narrowed in suspicion. The hollow sound beneath his boot made his lips curl into a cold, wicked grin. He'd known it, his gut had screamed it for days. Somebody was down there, hiding, breathing his air, eating his food. And Clyde didn't take kindly to ghosts on his land. With a grunt, he dropped to his knees and began yanking at the loose floorboards. The wood creaked and splintered under his brute force until he ripped one clean off, exposing the dark hollow beneath. There she was, Mama Mud still caked in her hair, eyes glinting in the dim lantern light. She stared up at him, battered but burning with defiance. Ridge was beside her, weak but sitting up, and Etta crouched in the shadows, clutching the rifle. For a moment, everything froze. "Well, ain't this a sight?" Clyde sneered. "I thought I buried you dead, woman. You just too damn stubborn." "To stay that way?" Mama didn't answer. She held Ridge's arm protectively, her eyes flicking toward Etta, silently warning her not to move, not yet. But Clyde noticed the glance. His eyes darted to the girl in the corner and spotted the rifle in her shaking hands. Hell," Clyde chuckled darkly. "Little girl thinks she's a soldier now. You planning on shooting your own daddy, Etta?" Etta's arms quivered, her finger resting near the trigger, but she couldn't bring herself to pull it. She was trembling, fighting the storm inside her: fear, rage, sorrow. Clyde climbed to his feet, keeping his pistol trained on Mama and Ridge. "You think you can all just hide here? That I wouldn't find you? You think you can betray me, Martha? You buried me alive," Mama spat, voice raspy but firm. "You tried to kill me 'cause I helped a man. I'll never forgive you for that," Clyde snorted. "Forgiveness? I didn't ask for it. You made your choice." Without warning, he pointed the gun straight at Etta. "Drop the rifle, girl, or I'll shoot your mama dead this time." Etta froze, eyes wide, her breath shaky. She looked to Mama, silently pleading for guidance. But before Etta could decide, Ridge, with a burst of strength, lunged at Clyde's legs from the pit. Clyde cursed and stumbled, the lantern falling and rolling across the barn floor, casting wild, swinging light. They grappled clumsily. Ridge, still wounded, didn't have much power, but desperation made him vicious. Clyde kicked Ridge hard, sending him sprawling back, coughing blood. He raised his pistol to finish Ridge off, But that split second gave Mama just enough time to lunge out of the hiding space. Grabbing Clyde's arm, the gun went off bang. The shot whizzing into the barn wall. Mama and Clyde wrestled, her fingernails clawing at his face, Clyde snarling and striking her back with brutal fists. "Etta!" Mama screamed through clenched teeth. "Shoot!" But Etta couldn't move, her hands shook uncontrollably. She had never fired a rifle before, never even hurt a living thing. But then Clyde threw Mama hard against the floor, standing over her. Pistol aimed right between her eyes. Etta's tears streamed down her cheeks, but suddenly everything became clear. She wasn't just a scared little girl anymore. She was her mother's daughter. She pulled the trigger. The rifle cracked with a deafening roar. The recoil knocked Etta back, but the bullet found its mark, slamming into Clyde's shoulder. He screamed in pain, the pistol dropping from his hand as he spun and collapsed to his knees, clutching his bleeding arm. The barn fell silent except for Clyde's ragged gasps and Etta's heaving breaths. Mama pushed herself up slowly, blood on, her lip but eyes shining with pride and sorrow. Etta had done what she must. Ridge, groaning but alive, looked between them and managed a strained smile. "Told you. She's stronger than she looks." Clyde knelt in the dirt, clutching his wound, eyes burning with hatred, but now he wasn't the monster in charge anymore. For the first time, Mama, Etta, and Ridge stood together, not as victims, but as a family ready to end this. Clyde groaned in the dirt of the barn, clutching his bleeding shoulder, but even wounded, his eyes smoldered with hatred. His pride had been shot just as badly as his flesh, and for a man like Clyde, pride was everything. He looked up at Etta, his own daughter, who stood with the rifle still trembling in her hands. The little girl he used to command with a glare had just defied him, and she'd drawn blood. "You're gonna regret that, girl," Clyde hissed through gritted teeth. "You think you're safe now? You ain't." But Mama stepped forward, limping but steady, standing between Clyde and her daughter. Her lip was split, her body bruised and weakened, yet her presence was unshaken. The woman he'd tried to kill was standing tall, and her eyes, sharp and burning, held no fear. "No," Mama said. "You're the one who'll regret it. You tried to bury me, Clyde, but I didn't die easy." Ridge pulled himself up with effort, leaning against a barn post for support. His face was pale, his breath ragged, but his gaze was locked on Clyde, unblinking. "You've lost," Ridge said. "Your own family's turned on you. That should tell you what kind of man you are." Clyde spat blood into the dirt. "She ain't family," he sneered, jerking his chin at Ridge. "You don't belong here." "I didn't have to belong," Ridge said softly. "I just didn't stand by while you killed good people." Clyde tried to stand, but his arm was useless, and the pain made him falter. Mama didn't move to help. She crossed her arms, standing over him like a judge. "You think because you raised your hand to me, to Etta, that we'd stay scared? Not anymore." Etta stepped up beside her mother, still shaking but growing steadier with each breath. She kept the rifle pointed at Clyde, her voice quiet but firm. "You said you owned us, Daddy, but you don't." Clyde's eyes darted between them, wife, daughter, stranger standing together against him. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't the one in control. He looked small, almost pitiful, his power stripped away by the very people he tried to crush. "Go on," he spat. "Shoot me dead then, girl. Let's see if you got the guts." But Mama shook her head. "No, that's too easy for you." She grabbed a length of rope hanging on the barn wall and tossed it to Ridge. "Tie him up." Ridge hobbled forward, and with Etta keeping the rifle trained, began binding Clyde's hands behind his back. Clyde struggled weakly, but there was no fight left in him, not really. He was a caged animal now, snarling but powerless. "What are you going to do with me?" Clyde growled. "We'll let the law decide," Mama said. "For once you'll answer for what you've done." Clyde laughed bitterly. The law? Out. Here? Ain't no sheriff care about a buried wife. Maybe not, Ridge said, but they'll care about a man who tried to kill his family and bury 'em alive. You'll rot before you see freedom again. As they finished tying him up, Mama leaned close, her voice low and cold. You buried me in the dirt, Clyde, but the dirt made me stronger. And it showed me who my real family is. Clyde glared at her, but she didn't flinch. She was done flinching. Etta looked down at her father and, with steady eyes, said quietly, You tried to bury my mama, but she didn't die easy. With that, they left Clyde there, tied and beaten, to wait for whatever justice would come his way. The first rays of dawn crept through the barn slats, casting light on the broken man in the dirt and on the family. Battered but unbroken, walking away together, they had survived. And more than that, they had won. The first golden rays of dawn stretched across the plains, painting the world in soft light as if nature itself was declaring that something new had begun. Inside the barn, Clyde sat slumped against a wooden beam, his arms bound tightly behind his back, his face streaked with blood, sweat, and dirt. The man who had once ruled this land with fists and fear now looked small like a shadow of himself. He muttered curses under his breath, but his voice had no bite left. Outside, Mama stood just beyond the barn doors, the cool morning air brushing against her bruised skin. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the wind. For the first time in years, she could breathe deeply, not as a beaten woman, but as a survivor. She ran her fingers along her neck where Clyde's hands had once gripped, and then down to her chest, still sore from clawing her way out of the dirt. But she was standing, and that meant everything. Ridge limped up beside her, his face pale from his injury, but his spirit unbroken. We can't stay here, he said, his voice low but steady. You know he'll find a way out. Or others will come looking when he doesn't show in town. We need to go. Mama nodded. She had already decided. This land, this house, they were soaked in memories of pain and blood. There was no future here for her children. Etta emerged from the barn, her little brother bundled on her back, the rifle still slung over her shoulder. She was tired, eyes heavy, but her steps were confident now. She had faced her father and survived. She was no longer the frightened girl hiding in corners. Mama, Etta whispered, where will we go? Mama looked out over the plains, watching the sun rise higher. Where the past can't find us, she said softly. We'll go with Ridge. He's got a ranch far from here. A place we can start fresh. Ridge nodded, confirming her words. It's not much, but it's land. Good land. You'll be safe there. And the boy? Mama asked, nodding to her sleeping son on Etta's back. He'll grow up knowing what real men are, Ridge promised. Not like the monster in that barn. They packed what little they could carry, food, a few blankets, tools. Mama didn't look back at the house. The walls remembered too many screams. The only thing she retrieved was a small locket hidden in her room, a keepsake from her own mother, a reminder that strength was in her blood long before Clyde ever tried to break her. Before they left, Etta glanced back at the barn where Clyde still sat, bound and seething. He shouted after them, his voice hoarse. You think you're free? You'll never be free of me. But Mama didn't even turn around. She only said, loud enough for him to hear, I crawled out of my own grave. Clyde, you can't kill what you couldn't bury. With that, they walked on away from the pain, the violence, and the dirt that was supposed to hold Mama forever. The prairie stretched out before them, wide and open. The wind felt like freedom on their faces. Etta walked taller with each step, her brother breathing softly against her back. Ridge, though still limping, stayed close to Mama's side. There was uncertainty ahead, but there was also hope, a hope born not from luck, but from sheer will to live. As the sun climbed higher, Etta reached for her mama's hand. "We're really free, Mama." Mama smiled gently, squeezing her daughter's hand. "We're free, baby, and we'll stay free. Because I didn't die easy. And neither will you." Together, they walked toward a new beginning, leaving behind the grave meant for Mama and the past that was meant to bury them all.